Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 46. Hello and welcome to the show. My guest this week is Erica Keswin. Erica has worked for over 20 years in organisational and leadership development and human resources. She was a consultant at the Hay Group and Booz Allen and Hamilton, and worked as an executive director at Russell Reynolds Associates. She also served as an executive coach at New York University's Stern School of Business. Since 2011, Erica has teamed up with Sherry Turkle, the MIT professor and author of Reclaiming Conversation, sharing her research on the impact of technology on relationships in the workplace. I hope you enjoy this episode with Erica Keswin. Hi Erica, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for making it onto Digital Mindfulness. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm wondering if you can just introduce yourself to the audience. What was your journey to focusing on the nature of relationships in the workplace and really the future of work?
Sure. So my background, I've spent about 20 plus years in what I would describe as the human capital space and really helping companies improve their performance through people. So I've started in management consulting, worked for Booz Allen, went to the Hay Group, which is a human resources consulting firm, and did leadership development and developing incentive plans for companies. I even worked at Russell Reynolds Associates, recruiting top executives around the world, making sure that they had the right culture fit for different companies. And I've also been an executive coach. So I look at this, I see the performance of companies through a number of different lenses, but they are all connected through people. So a number of years ago, I was working at NYU Business School at the time in a coaching role, and my family and I have twin girls who are 13 and an 11-year-old son. So not only am I interested in technology and relationships in the workplace, it's clearly infiltrating my house, which could be a whole separate discussion. We had an opportunity to take a family sabbatical, and we actually moved to Aspen, Colorado for a year. And at the time, it was a great opportunity to sort of leave Manhattan and come to the mountains and really dig in to family life. And I knew I'd figure out my next move from a work perspective. Something would come. And in terms of technology, I was in a place where I was using technology for work. I'm sure like many of your listeners, back in the day, I had my BlackBerry, and I saw myself literally becoming increasingly addicted to that red light. And the red light would go on, I would grab it, and I thought, what is happening to me? And then I got the iPhone, and I could not get rid of the BlackBerry. So I thought my strategy would be to have both. So I was one of those people that had the BlackBerry and the iPhone, and really was at a very early age struggling with how do I maintain my relationships with all of this technology. And at the same time, as I said, I had these 3 kids, and I wanted to be a good role model for them. And so it was constantly on my mind. So we moved to Aspen. And as I'm here right now this summer, it's in the middle of the Aspen Ideas Festival, which for any of your listeners, it is a phenomenal experience. And what's great about it is that anybody around the world can log on and get the Aspen Ideas app. And now almost all of the sessions are taped and available online. So I went to one of the sessions. And at the time, again, this is 6 years ago, one of the tracks was on technology and social media. And I thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to go to one of these sessions and pick up some tips on how to minimize any psychological damage I was doing to my kids, given my own addictions to technology, and this will be great. And one of the sessions was led by Dr. Sherry Turkle, who is an MIT professor. And I went to the session, and she was on a book tour for her last book, which was called Alone Together. And I bought the book, I had her sign it, and we literally struck up a conversation. And we decided to go out and get a cup of coffee. And over the next 30 to 45 minutes, just talked about technology and relationships and the research and the work that she had done. And one of her findings was that after she'd written Alone Together was that many people would rather text than talk. And this isn't just millennials, not just young people, it's all ages. And she wanted to look at why that was. And her next body of research was going to be focused on what she was calling The Flight from Conversation. And she had written this op-ed that went crazy viral. And if anybody hasn't read it, it's a great piece that was written in the New York Times. And she talked about how do we begin as a society to reclaim conversation. And she wanted to look at that in different, what I call verticals, but different aspects of life. From medicine, you go to the doctor and you want to look at him or her in the eye and the person's typing, or education. Are my kids going to go to college from their couch, or what is the value of those face-to-face interactions? And then finally, she said the business world. How does technology impact, if I'm sitting, Lawrence, next to you in an office and I decide to text you instead of walking 3 feet, how does that impact us, our relationship, and the company? So this is sort of a long story, but you'll see the connection here. That was my light bulb moment, my aha moment, where I said, this brings what I've done for 20 years in helping companies improve their performance to people and this new world of technology. And I said to Sherry, you know what? You don't know me from Adam. However, this is my background, and I would love to work with you on the business section of this book. And she said, great, come on board. And for 3+ years, we traveled around the country interviewing CEOs, millennials, and everybody in between across industries, law firms, financial services firms, the campuses of Silicon Valley, startups, and talk to them about the impact of technology on relationships. So the book came out in October, and Sherry wrote the book, and again, I participated on the business section, and now I have taken that and I've been speaking to companies about these issues and trying to work with them in a very hands-on way to say, how can we maintain and build strong relationships and connections in this digital world?
That's great, Erica. There's so much there. But why would you say then it's so important? Why are in-person connections so important to business in an age when knowledge workers and people can just connect virtually to anyone at any time, anywhere in the world?
The way that I think about this, both personally and the way that I talk about it with clients, is, both are important. We can't say that all we need to do is meet face to face, because the reality, as we all know, look, I'm in Aspen, you're in London right now, and we're having this great conversation. And without the technology, we would not be able to do this. We're looking at each other right now, and we wouldn't be able to do that. There's also cost involved, for me flying over to London to meet with you this morning. So what I try to do is look at it from a strategic perspective. And I say to myself, the phrase that I use is match the message to the medium. And what I mean by that is I think about communication along a continuum. On the one end, you have IM to text, to email, to pick up the phone, to walk across the hall, to fly to London, to have a meeting. And many people of all ages are now starting to default to the technological response. And I urge people to pause. Before you send that, before you press send, before you send that email, that text, think about what is the goal in this interaction? What are you trying to achieve? From a business perspective, are you trying to close a deal? Get a new client? Are you trying to influence someone? Are you trying to get a mentor? And you're a more junior person and you really you're in sales and you want to connect with someone in marketing. Maybe you should, quote unquote, move up the food chain and get out of your chair and walk down the hall. So I think not all interactions are created equal, and to really think about your time and when does it make more sense to invest time in some of those other mediums. And I do believe that you will oftentimes get a bigger return on that investment in time. And we all know that when you do have that face-to-face conversation, good things can happen. And, I'm sure we can talk about it, but, all the data that shows about the correlation between, bumping into somebody at the water cooler and innovation and ideas that come out of it. So we can't do it all the time. It's not reality, but we need to be strategic.
I think you're absolutely right that people do need to be strategic in the choices that they make when they connect with people. But why would you say that people do default to that technological response?
I think there are a lot of different reasons. And from the people with whom I've spoken, some of them, there is a misplaced sense of efficiency. There is assumed efficiency. You default to technology because you assume it's more important. More efficient and faster. And oftentimes it's not. We all know after we've sent two emails back and forth, the efficiency assumption is clearly misplaced. So I think that's one reason. And companies now are actually putting in protocols. Again, not a lot, and I think this is just beginning. And you and I working in the corporate space, we're going to start to see more of this. But there are companies that will say, okay, after two back and forths, you must pick up the phone. You must go down the hall. And you can't police that 100%, but even taking the first step and saying that from a corporate perspective, these email back and forths do not work. So I think misplaced efficiency is one. I think that there's a group of people, and it's not all putting it on the millennials, but some of the younger people who have grown up primarily communicating via technology have less of a comfort level in these other communication mediums. They'll say to me, they are scared to pick up the phone. They're more comfortable face to face, but that in between picking up the phone, they'll say, well, I don't understand. How can you tell what the person is thinking and feeling? They can't hear the intonation because they haven't grown up with it. So I think there's a fear factor, and some companies, again, are responding by creating actual training programs around it to teach people, some of the other types of communication skills when they lack comfort. And so I think it's, and then the third I would say is some people are just lazy.
This is really interesting, the whole thing you were just mentioning about people having to relearn empathy, because just from some of the interviews that we've had on the show, some experts have been saying that technology can insulate people and lead people into kind of almost a false sense of security where they don't have to learn the subtleties of intonation or the micro changes in facial expressions. And again, is that something that you would agree with, Erica?
I would. I mean, some people for sure hide behind technology. I mean, you don't, in a face-to-face conversation, you have to react and respond on the spot. You can't curate everything when you're actually having a conversation. So I do think that many people would prefer to default to an email because they can really think about every word and how it's said and don't have to put themselves out there. What they need to realize is that there's also a downside, that you're not building as strong of a relationship with the person. And that I link that back to a lot of the Gallup studies that show when people don't have real connections and even friends at work, they're less engaged, they're less happy. And so it's not good for the person. And also from a company bottom line perspective, if people aren't connecting and all they're doing is communicating via technology and not building these relationships, there's a much stronger chance, much higher turnover, and much stronger chance that they leave. And as turnover is highly, highly expensive for a company.
So, Erica, in your writing, you've written a lot about the cultivation of what you call a third space, that space in between face-to-face conversation or connection and online connections. And I'm just wondering if you can tell us what that is exactly.
Great. And people have different definitions of the third space. To me, the third space is where technology can become part of the solution. It's that space in between the fully remote technological response and the face-to-face. Because I think that, it's not realistic for me to go into a company and say, okay, we all need to be face-to-face all the time. We need to put our phones in the basket and call it a day. I mean, I think I would be sort of laughed out of the room given the state of business today. So to me, the third space is figuring out what are the times where we quote unquote put technology in its place. And we can talk about a lot of the companies that now have real guidelines and protocols about technology in meetings and technology, the expectations of technology after work and on the weekends. But the third space, what I like to think about is how can we leverage technology to build strong relationships? Because the reality is we're going to be managing people all over the place. So some real concrete examples I can give are I had a conversation with a senior executive at Google. And of course, they use Google Hangout, which would make sense. And she said that she was meeting with her team, and as she does, every week, and they're all over the world. And even she said to herself, how can I use this technology to build stronger, more authentic relationships? Because yes, we do get together, but maybe it's once a year, maybe it's once a quarter, but by and large, we are remote. And she said that one of the things she tried was that she said to her team, okay, tomorrow for our call, we are going to try something different. We are going to be on Google Hangout, but we're going to stand up. We're going to get in front of our desk. We are going to get a cup of coffee. We're going to make sure the camera is on. We're going to move closer to the camera. And we're going to, try to have more of a conversation. And we all know and have seen the data, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it, is that when you're on a conference call or even on a Skype and sitting behind your desk, many people today are multitasking. And, it really can be harmful to relationships, whether you're in a face-to-face meeting or in this quote unquote, third space trying to build these connections, via technology. So she said that it had a real impact on the ability to really connect. And so that's just one example. I have many others, but it's a way to say we're going to use this technology, but we're going to really try to think about a way. There are good, better, and best ways to do it, and we're going to try to use the technology to build more authentic relationships.
You've just spoken there really well about Google and what they do to use tech to foster closer relationships. But do you think that this thinking is more widespread amongst companies in general?
I would say we are at the beginning of this. There are some companies that haven't thought about it at all. There are pockets of people, mid-level managers in companies that are taking protocols within their own teams. And that's one of the things that I love about this work is that, yes, in a perfect world, we would love to start with the CEO and have these practices come down through get translated down through the organization all the way to the bottom. But absent that, there are still very practical, real things that a mid-level manager could do with his or her team to make a real impact. So I would say it's all over the place. Where I've seen some great work are people that have started companies in the last 5 years who have had the luxury of starting with a clean sheet of paper and have said, from a values perspective, what do I want this to look like? And I'll share with you a great example. And I just met with him recently. His name is Dan Callista, and he's the CEO of a company called Dynamic, which is a healthcare consulting firm out of Philadelphia. And I just want to spend a few minutes telling you about him because I think it's really relevant to this conversation. He came out of management consulting, which I can relate to because I came out of it as well. And typically that is a business where you are on 24/7. Your clients are dictating your life. You get on a plane on Monday, you get sent to Timbuktu and often don't have a choice. And many people don't think there are other ways of doing that type of business. But the upside is that you work with really smart people, you're getting unbelievable experience, you're getting compensated well, and that's just life. But what's happening now in many of these firms is that the people are burning out. Millennials are coming and saying, you know what, I'm not doing this. And so the pain point that some of these companies are feeling is that if they don't figure out a way to manage the technology, both in terms of after work and on the weekends and also intraday, they're losing people. So they're finally starting to wake up to needing these protocols. But Dan was at one of these firms and he had his aha moment and one day said, you know what, there has got to be a better way to do this, a more humane way to do this. So he started this company and said, from the get-go, his values were going to be focused on creating a company where, he honored relationships, which is really my passion to begin to think about. And technology is a big piece of this. So, an example so he came up with this, just a million examples, but just one that relates to the question you just asked me is that he has a program called Z-Mail, ZZZ Mail, as in catching some Z's. And he really believes that people not only should be able to sleep, and many people, Arianna Huffington has her new book on sleep, but people need to disconnect. And he knows that this will be good for them individually and good for his company if people actually can disconnect from work. And so this program called Zmail basically says that you cannot email for the most part. And there's always, it's a client-driven business. There are always exceptions, but let's say 80-20 rule that you are not to email after 6 and you're not to email on the weekends. And if you're working on a time-sensitive project, everybody knows and they work really hard. It's not that people don't work hard. They're all in. But it forces you to press that pause button before you send an email, at 6 o'clock at night. And just a funny anecdote was that there's something that the people at Vynamic called the Z-bomb, that it's someone who sends an email at 5:55, needing a response. But it just makes people really, it's an awareness building, which I'm sure you're seeing and thinking about so much, that it makes, and I wanted to email him. I'm having a call with him today, and I wanted to email him over the weekend. And I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And so I emailed him Monday morning and I said, Dan, I had this great idea and I wanted to email you, but I didn't. So yes, companies are starting. And I think it's only going to go up from here.
I just want to pick up on a word that you mentioned in passing just now, which is humane. And it's a word that I've seen used referring to how people relate to technology, particularly in the workplace. And do you think, Erica, that this is too strong a word? Do you think that the way that we work and connect with technology is inhumane?
Well, it's really interesting. So while I've been doing all of this research, starting with Sherry and then on my own, I started seeing and these different words popping up. 5 years ago, you wouldn't see, the word human, humane as it relates to work. All of a sudden, we are seeing it everywhere. We're seeing words like authentic, transparent, and human over and over. And I even went to this conference in May. It was a HR conference. But it was called Work Human. It was a work human conference. And there were 1,000 people there talking about working human. So I said to myself, what on earth is going on here? Human work as opposed to what? Are we talking about robots or, what does this mean? It was almost like saying, talking about the ocean as watery. What other kind of work are we going to have? And so that has been the focus. And I'm doing this really interesting project now to go around and ask people, when you talk about a human workplace, what are you talking about? Because I was seeing it everywhere I looked, and I had to go deeper and understand it. So I can share with you my 3 takeaways of, at least for me, what I think this means. And I will also say that my hunch into why we're seeing this now everywhere we look is that I do believe it's in response to this digital world and feeling connected 24/7. Like, we are feeling pain from this and we don't know what to do. And so I think that's part of the conversation. So as I've been going around, and this is in the last 6 months, I went down and I met with executives at JetBlue, and that's why I was at Vynamic, and I met with this amazing, really interesting company run by a millennial, a boxed wine company called Archer Roos. I'm really trying to talk to so many different people about what it means to work human. So I think it's a great question. To me, it comes down to 3 things. One, companies that say they're working human truly honor relationships. They are putting that first and foremost. It's part of their strategy, and it's not just lip service. So, and we can talk more about what that means. I would say number 2, and this is really interesting to me, that these human workplaces are really activated from all sides. So this is not just a top-down phenomenon. It's top-down. I am looking at it top-down, bottom-up, and inside-out. So it's the junior person that comes in and says, you know what? We need to do this differently, and here's why. It's a junior person at a consulting firm recently that told me that she wanted to bring in a program. They didn't have any volunteer programs, and a program where they're really focused on social impact. And she brought that to the CEO, and the CEO said, great, build a business case and we can do it. And now they're connected and partnering with Junior Achievement. It's also sometimes coming from clients. So again, a lot of different examples, but it's top down, bottom up, and inside out. And the third goes back to what we talked about earlier, that human workplaces are figuring out ways to integrate the technology. So to me, it comes down to those three things.
Going back to the first point you made, this whole idea of honoring relationships, could you just expand on that a little bit? Because are you talking about, because companies work very, very hard to build better relationships with their customers, but you're talking about this from the entire company perspective, I imagine.
Yes, 100%. I think it's both the customer experience and also the employee experience, because companies are realizing that in this new age, their biggest, what they have to offer the world really are their people. And, attracting and retaining the best people is going to make the difference for their company. Again, not altruistic from a from a capitalist bottom line perspective. And what they are seeing, and one of the things that I think is really an interesting, contrast or juxtaposition is that many people today think the millennials, all they want to do is be on email. But when you speak to the millennials and now the next generation after millennials, they want to build relationships. They want their managers to know them as people. They want their managers to know them. They don't want to be a cog in the wheel. So on the one hand, yes, they love all of this technology. And again, the companies need the technology. They need to figure out which are the best technologies for them. But, and again, this is not happening in as many companies as it should. The managers need to be better trained in having real connections and relationships with this new body of young talent coming into the organization. Because young people tend to not leave companies, they leave managers. So to me, when a company really honors relationships, a big piece of it is dedicating time to connect with people. And, I always say, sort of no pun intended, left to your own devices, you're going to be on email all day. But, some of the best practice managers, whether it's Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn or, a big financial services company I met with every day, they literally have a plan. Every day they get up and just talk to people around the office to get a pulse. And so that's one piece of building relationships and honoring relationships. And that goes back to the face-to-face. So it's got to be front and center of your strategy.
Being digital now in the 21st century, that basically allows us to live a 24/7 lifestyle. If we want to be connected all day, every day, we can be connected. And I was wondering what you think, Erica, to what extent do you think our connection practices at work are a product of our mindset, corporate mindset, or whether it's actually the technology that we use that compels us to be connected all the time?
I think it's a combination of a number of factors. I would say, linking back to the last thing we talked about, I think part of it's based on the company that you work for and what is communicated and what the protocols are. And unfortunately, more often than not, nothing gets communicated about 24/7 expectations. So if people don't tell you, you don't have to check your email at 11 o'clock at night, many people will. So I think part of it is on the corporate side. From there, it goes down to individual managers. I think that even if you have a corporate policy and you have a manager that breaks the rules and is still emailing people 24/7, that can be toxic as well. I think the third level goes back to our own discipline, because even if a company says you don't have to check email, many people will say to me, I can't help it. They want to stay on. So there's it's these different layers: the company, the manager, your own mindset, and your own discipline, and reading all the literature and the stuff that you put out and that people talk about in your podcast about the importance of disconnection and saying, I know that I'm I want to be connected. And there is this, this is not my expertise, but I have read about it. I mean, it is addictive, and you do get a hit of dopamine every time you check an email, which is why when I started having my own issues with the red light in my BlackBerry, I learned about why I kept checking my phone. So I think that it's the technology is pulling us, and we need to have the discipline and the mindset, and then almost the permission on the corporate side. So it's all of these factors together from my perspective.
It's funny, isn't it? I think because at work, we're also rewarded for being connected all the time, right? I know that certainly some of the work in some of the places where I've worked, not just in Europe, but abroad as well, it's almost like an unsaid law, if you like, that people do tend to look down on you, if you do leave before the boss, or if you aren't connected the whole time. And this whole idea, I think, maybe of reward, about how people really we're rewarded for doing more. And I think we think we're doing more by being connected all the time, by being available all the time. And I've definitely been guilty of this. And would you say that kind of mindset is prevalent?
I would say I would say a bright light is that it's starting to change, and that companies are now seeing that when people get burned out, they tend to leave and not be as productive. So they're trying to build this into the reward system. So a great example that I have, actually, it was at the Ideas Festival last year. Anne-Marie Slaughter was here, and she gave this great example. She was about, at least at the time, had 200 people that worked for her company. And she talked about a manager who was so burned out, hadn't taken any vacation, and his stress was infiltrating his team, which at the end of the day was bad for business. And she, sort of dinged him on his performance review and on his bonus. And, next year he is going to take a vacation. So she was trying to put her money where her mouth is, saying, we mean business. We don't want you working 24/7. And if you do, it's a problem. And, there's a lot of the companies that are moving toward unlimited vacation, which, has been good in some companies, but actually in some companies it's led to people taking less vacation. There are a company in Denver called Full Contact that actually pays people $7,500 to take a tech-free vacation. So many companies now are coming up with ways to say there is a direct correlation between being on 24/7 and stress, and we are going to do something about it, and we are going to hold you accountable to do your part.
In the digitized workplace, Erica, what do you think are some of the most important skills that people can bring?
I believe that, as we were talking about before, when you're so much of communication is nonverbal, and when you're not seeing someone, when we are increasingly not face to face, we have to think about these other skills that can begin to compensate for us not being face to face. So the ones that jump out to me are active listening. I mean, you have got to figure out how and really become a much better listener is a big one. I would say empathy. There's a lot of studies that show that there's, that the technology, all the markers, Sherry talks about this in her book, that the markers for empathy are down, especially in kids. But I see it in the workplace that, when you're on all this technology, you're not as empathetic. So you really need to focus on, even in a stronger way, understanding another person's point of view. And then I think patience, and I would say discipline, because as much as we all want to be sending emails all day, we're not going to get our work done. We're not going to focus, and we're not going to build strong relationships if we don't have some discipline.
So, Erica, how do you personally connect meaningfully in the workplace?
I go back to what my own values are. So when I think about, I have always been, when people say what's one word that describes you, I'm the connector. I love connecting you to this CEO for your next podcast. I even have 3 weddings under my belt. So I love to connect people. And I see myself as a real relationships person, and I get a lot from that. And that's a commitment that I make. But I do see how even if that's an important value and something that I want to do, without a real strategy and specific times that I'm going to meet with people, have coffee, connect with them face to face, it won't happen. So the way I do it is, number one, I have a plan. I am going to meet with 3 people every week. And I figure out when that's going to work in my calendar, and that is a goal and a priority. The second thing that I do is, when I am with someone face to face, it goes back to the skills. I bring that level of discipline. And I don't know if anyone on your show has talked about the iPhone effect, but there have been a number of studies that show that if you and I are face to face having a cup of coffee, and one of us has our phone on the table, and the most recent study says even if it's in our peripheral vision, which was so fascinating to me, if our phones are out, it will change the substance, the depth of the conversation. And so my feeling is, if I'm doing this because I want to build this relationship and connect with you, I am going to have my phone away. Obviously, if I need to do something really important, I'll take a call. But, why invest that time when if the phone is out, it's going to be a much less substantive conversation. So that's another way that I make sure that when I'm investing the time, I get the most out of those connections.
It's great as well, because all of the skills you've just spoken about, they're all trainable. They're not things you were born with. Empathy, active listening, scheduling, disciplining yourself. These are all trainable.
No, it is a great point that, you can come in with, when you're recruiting and hiring for a company, you always look for what are those certain skills that like emotional intelligence and certain things that you really have to have coming in. But then many of these things, I totally agree with you that you can improve on many of these items.
So, Erica, my penultimate question is, how can we be more human in the digital age? And again, just a little follow-on question is, how can we cultivate that trait, that human trait?
To me, again, it's really thinking about things through the lens of other people and of relationships. So it's everything from pausing before you send an email and ruining someone's weekend. It is thinking about, thinking about who do you want to do business with? So, for example, this woman, Marion Leitner, who runs this new really cool box wine company called Archer Roos, her strategy is, she wants to work with people who have human work practices. So, for example, she goes down and she meets the people face to face who are picking the grapes, and make sure that the people at the vineyards are treating those workers in a human way. So I think you can look at it outside in terms of your customers and your clients and how you do business, and then also internally, how are you treating your people? And then a big part of it is, are the senior executives in your company walking the walk? And without that, it's very difficult to do the rest.
How can you, if you're, and I'm thinking, if you are part of an organization, if you're part of the kind of bottom-up person, not just not just in the C-suite, how can you affect that change? What's something that someone can do to affect that change at the top and also at the bottom?
I think this is happening more and more because, again, it goes back to that pain point. It's a great time where the pendulum is swinging back, because soon, many companies that I speak with, 50% of the employees in the company are millennials. And so finally, the C-suite is realizing that they need to be more open and listen. So I'm finding that, whether it's a millennial, finding 1 or 2 key people that can be a champion for them to bring some of those ideas up. Many companies have employee resource groups of, where groups of, whether it's for women or millennials get together to think about different ways to do business. Or even that example with a consulting firm was where the junior person came in and said, I want to have this program. It's being willing to find those senior people who are like-minded and open to change and bringing those ideas up. And I think it's becoming less difficult. I feel like there's almost this meeting of the minds, because without change, they won't be able to retain this very, very critical group of employees.
Awesome. Erica, where can people find out more about you and your work?
My company is called OPR, which stands for Organization Performance Relationships. I am going through a bit of a rebrand, but for now, my website is www.opr-consult.com. And my email is erica.keswin, Keswin, at opr-consult.com. And I have a blog on the Huffington Post that you can Google. And I've written probably 9 or 10 articles at this point, all related to the things that we've been talking about. And I'm really in the process of interviewing tons of people in companies about this human workplace. So feel free to reach out if anybody has great things that they're doing. I'm really excited about having this conversation.
Erica, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and to share your findings and your wisdom with us. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
You're welcome. It was really great to meet you. And the next time, I hope it's face-to-face over a cup of coffee.